And we are a traffic-delayed coalition, loud and proud, outrage-porn-free, civilly disobedient media broadcasting live on the Worldwide Coalition Network here at the GoLocal Live Broadcast Center, 90 Way Botza Street, in the heart of the city we love, Providence, Rhode Island. The naked city, the city of 1,000 stories. The city where right now, just a few short miles away, folks from the group called the FANG Collective are doing their own little meet and greet with our governor, Gina Raimondo, at a bar, I believe it's called The Troop, because today is Drinks with Gina. So where better to spend an afternoon if you're an environmental warrior, or you have a conscience, you're a social justice believer, than having a drink with Gina Raimondo. So as an organization that celebrates, extols, and looks to the virtual and polite, sometimes not so polite, civil disobedience, my hat's off to the FANG Collective. My hope is that they'll be able to join us a little later on this evening in studio just to say hi and talk about the chat and the good times they had with Gina in the run-up. Oh, that's right. There's an election next week. That means something, damn it. More on that later. Facebook.com/The Coalition Radio, on the mighty Twitter at Coalition_radio, our all apolitical anti-billionaire baseball boys club Twitter feed at Pawtucket is home, and the mothership, coalitionradio.us. So, let's get right to it. Joining me via the miracle of Skype telephone is someone who is a longtime contributor to the coalition and a longtime contributor to the life both here in Rhode Island and internationally, given his stalwart, brave, sometimes a little impulsive, but at all times highly principled, ethically driven activities, fighting on behalf of all of us here on the planet. And of course, bringing to light the issues surrounding climate change, fossil fuels, the impact locally, nationally, and of course internationally. And of course, I'm talking about Dr. Peter Nightingale. He's a physics professor at the University of Rhode Island and a board member, I think, of everything including, let's see, FANG, Raging Grannies, Nature's Trust, the FERC 4, yikes, where do I begin? Peter, welcome back to the coalition. It's been way too long. How have you been?
I'm being fantastic. Thank you very much. I'm speechless after this introduction. But other than that, I'm fine. Thank you. It's wonderful to be on your show.
Well, listen, saints live amongst us, and clearly we need to take a moment. I would be remiss. I had Pat Fonce on the show a few weeks ago, and we took a moment to observe the passing of a friend and someone who had also been a warrior. So it's important that we live together, we fight together, we coalesce, we organize, we challenge each other. Sometimes we argue with each other, but it's at moments like this that we need to recognize the value and the heart that all of us put into fighting a variety of issues, both, again, locally, nationally, and internationally. And tell us, if you can, if we could spend a minute talking about Bob, and just maybe give us a brief kind of testimony as to his value as a citizen here in Rhode Island. How lucky we were to have him.
Yeah, well, Robert Mullen was one of my friends, and he passed away, as you said. We've worked on numerous things, going back to Occupy Providence, Fossil-Free Rhode Island, Nature's Trust, and actually the petition that we delivered at DEM recently, on Wednesday to be precise, was dedicated to him and another board member who unfortunately also died on Patrick's Day. But Robert was unbelievable. He was full of energy. He was a wonderful friend, a wonderful person, and we miss him dearly.
Yeah, what was remarkable about him, amongst many things that I've mused on, and a couple times we've had folks on with the environmental movement, was, his constant sense of his optimism, and you know, his willingness to really engage at every level. You know, and I take time to point out folks like him who've graced us, because I think all of us need to look at ourselves and say, all right, you know, here are people in front of us who've dedicated literally their lives to simply making the world a better place. And, you know, we can agree or disagree on political issues, on the superficialities of life. We can agree or disagree on techniques and approaches. But ultimately, if we don't celebrate the humanity of people like him who are willing to literally dedicate their lives to making this a better place to live and inculcate simultaneously a sense of social justice, I fear you know, this is something you and I talked about briefly this afternoon, you know, I fear the current generation simply will lose both the love and the outrage at the same time. I think that's as important as the issues are. I think it's just as important to pass along to the next generation that combined sense of love, optimism, hope, outrage, and truth. And certainly you do a hell of a job of that yourself, sir.
Well, you know, I was mentioning the petition that we delivered at DEM, and we did that on behalf of young people. And I must say, after that event, we had a press conference, and we had a graduate student from URI speak, and the youngest person who was there was 11 years old. And we can learn from kids that age. It really is true. The statement that he made is on our website, and well, it ends with he talks about social justice or environmental justice, which is something that Robert cared about a lot too, and he ends with, "This is our fight, and we will win." So, you know, right. I have to disagree slightly with you because the younger generation is doing exactly what they're telling us what we need to be doing.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a great segue into let's talk about Nature's Trust RI. Its history, its organization, its goals, and again, you all delivered a very powerful message to the my term, not yours, the overlords at the DEM. One of those stealth one of those stealth governmental agencies that exists really on the periphery of everything, but at the same time, very quietly but very aggressively impacts the quality of all our lives. So give us a little bit of history and a little bit of background.
Well, so the name of the organization comes from a book that was written by a legal scholar on the West Coast, a professor by the name of Mary Christina Wood. And she wrote a book literally called Nature's Trust. And the idea is actually, it's a couple of hundred pages long, but the idea is very simple. The environment is a trust. And the trustee, the person, the legal person in charge of the environment is the government. Well, what do you do if you have a trustee that doesn't take care of the trust? You take him to court, right? Mm-hmm. It's that simple. So basically, that's what we're doing. We became aware of it, I think, about 3 years ago or so, when Mary Wood was interviewed by Bill Moyers. It was his last interview. And the whole idea of the approach, namely, you have kids who go to court, and the judge can't say, well, you have no dog in this fight. And the kid says to the judge, so you're destroying my future? I have no dog in this fight? You know, this is the issue that you always hear in court cases. You have no standing. Get out of my courtroom. Right. Well, that doesn't go over very well if you do that to kids whose environment and whose future you're literally destroying. So that's basically the whole idea. And we formed an organization to do that in Rhode Island and tell Rhode Island government that they are the trustee of the environment. And that is a legal principle that actually is acknowledged in Rhode Island. And so what we do is we went to DEM, as you said, they're basically the boss of the environment, and tell them, hey, it is your job to put in place a number of rules that make sure that we do not keep polluting the environment by burning fossil fuels, And then, you know, it gets more and more complicated because you have to drag in all the law. I can tell you more if you want to know. But
no, please go.
Basically, the idea.
Please feel free to go into as much detail as you like, because this.
Oh, okay.
The beauty of this show is this conversation acts really as a record of a moment in time of a variety of political movements that are taking place, so that when we look back on this, we can understand exactly what we were fighting for, how we were fighting it, and what tools were used. So all of this is very, very valuable.
Oh, okay. Well, then I'll tell you more of the details. I'll leave out the technicalities, excuse me, but I'll give you the details. So basically, what has been happening, and it sort of is reflected in the interviews that you've done with me on the show, is DEM has been improving all sorts of pollution and handing out permits incrementally. From my perspective, it started in Burrillville with the expansion of the compressor station. And then, you know, you bring more gas to a place. Guess what happens? Well, somebody comes, Invenergy in this case, and they want to burn it, so they plan a power plant. So actually the AIM project, which was supported by all of our leadership, our congressional delegation in particular, brought more gas to Burrillville. And that gas will fuel the power plant. It will also be used, produce liquid natural gas in Providence. So National Grid is going to build, or is planning to build a facility at Fields Point. And all of that is because every step of the way, this is a tiny thing, we don't have to worry. And so they do this, they issue these permits incrementally. Mm-hmm. And well, the fact of the matter is, if you look at Rhode Island law, and this is a literal quote from the law, DEM is responsible for, and this is a quote, the cumulative effects on the environment. So in other words, you can't just incrementally say, and every time say, oh, this is a tiny step, it's not going to hurt anybody. No, you have to look at the sum total of what you're doing. So the petition that we handed in on Wednesday tells them, you have to live up to this duty. And we also reminded them of the fact that actually the Rhode Island Constitution, and this goes back to this issue that I mentioned before, namely nature's trust. It's called the public trust doctrine, actually. But that's part of the Rhode Island Constitution. It says that there is a duty to provide for the conservation of air, land, and water. And that, again, is a literal quote from, what is it, Article 1 of the Constitution. People can look it up. I'm not making this up. So they have to do that. And then, of course, the question is, well, how are you going to do that? Well, DEM has the authority to put in place rules. So the rules say the physics of the situation, climate change science tells us that we cannot put more carbon dioxide and greenhouse gas into the environment than a certain amount. That's our budget. And if you overspend that budget, you end up in a very bad place, climate chaos. So we're telling them, you have to make sure that Rhode Island does not spend more of that budget than it can fairly do. And this is how you keep track of it. And then it goes even further, because we say, look, if you decide, Rhode Island, that you're going to export all of your production to China, where all the stuff that Walmart sells comes from, you are responsible for the greenhouse gases that went into the production of those goods produced in China. I mean, we're talking about not at one tiny little state, we're talking about a global problem. So we're telling them, you have to count what is called embodied emissions. In other words, how much did it produce in transport, how much did China put into the environment? And then we're also telling them, and then this is where it goes back to the beginning, namely fracked gas and the stuff that comes to Burrillville. Basically, EPA and the state and all these people are taking a mortgage on the future. They're saying, you know, we're spreading the effect of of methane, which is natural gas, out over 100 years, and then it's not such a serious problem. But if you do that by that spreading out, you're actually giving far too little weight to what is actually happening right now. And if you look at for instance, the Arctic, stuff is going downhill on a time scale of a decade. This is the physicist speaking, Right. I always think in terms of time scales. 100 years is way too long. We're talking about decades. So you have to make sure you count this correctly. And that's basically what we're telling them to do.
So,
does that make sense?
Absolutely. So you've got now enshrined in the Constitution, effectively, a responsibility not only to monitor, but to minimize the footprint of, if you will, the footprint, if you will, of environmental behavior within the state completely. Is that a fair summation?
Well, yes, that is correct, but it's more stringent than that, because it's as if you're spending money from a bank account.
Right.
And you cannot go red. So you really have to say, I'm not only trying to minimize this, but I'm actually trying to stay below a certain level, a very well-defined level. So, yeah, I compare it to spending from a bank account. As soon as you go into the red, you're dead in this case.
Now the DEM, I mean, what's fascinating about this, because when you start to put the puzzle together, and right, it all goes back to the compressor station, if you will, the chain of evidence on this particular series of crimes starts there. That was the precipitative event that has led to so much tragedy in the past few years.
Absolutely.
Has there ever been a requirement, and essentially, for the DEM to display a master plan? Because that's the next logical step. If in fact these are well planned, and I happen to agree with you now in retrospect, well planned series of incremental steps meant to bring an industrial, almost 19th century energy grid to drop that like a bomb into the center of Rhode Island. And I agree with you that if you took the compressor station, matched it up with the LNG plant, if you threw in a little dash of Invenergy, and said to everybody, this is what we want the state to look like in X number of years, people would have had a fit. It just
say that again, please.
In other words, if you were,
I missed the word.
If you were to take all these different elements and have presented it as one step-by-step plan to the people of Rhode Island, much in the way that how they reacted to the container port years ago in Narragansett Bay, where it was presented, if you will, this is what it will look like, people would have had a fit. They would have thrown a fit. They simply never would have allowed it to happen. And so I agree with you, but does there exist by law, or should there exist by law, what the master plan is for energy production and the grid here in Rhode Island?
I think the whole problem is so complicated because we're dealing with a global problem. And you say, from the point of view of Rhode Island, it all starts in Burrville. I agree with that. But the trouble with natural gas is most of what we burn here comes from Pennsylvania.
Right.
And as it's being piped, and before it's even piped, a lot of that stuff escapes. And it doesn't escape in Rhode Island. It escapes at the wellheads, which are in Pennsylvania. And so we need to take into account that the gas that we use has a footprint not just in the state, but far outside the state. And people talk about carbon dioxide as being a dangerous gas. Natural gas, or methane, actually is more than 100 times as powerful per unit weight. And let me not get into the details. It's much more powerful than carbon dioxide, and a lot of that stuff escapes out of state. So this is an ethical issue. Namely, if somebody steals something and gives it to you, you can say, "Oh, well, I didn't steal it." but there is no ethical system under the sun that says that you're not responsible for where things come from. So that pushes things a little beyond the standard law, but people have to accept that this is the rule that you have to abide by. Namely, if something comes from China and it takes gas or oil to bring it here, well, you have to put that on your bill and say that's what I spent. But then, and it's more complicated also from a regulatory point of view, because DEM is in the loop, but they do only give important but relatively minor permits out. The gas that was piped to Burrville for the compressor station, that project was approved by FERC, by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. You mentioned FERC. That's one of why we were in D.C. protesting that.
Right. My understanding is you have more than a passing familiarity with the office layout there.
Well, I think that goes in both directions. Yes.
What? By the way, while we're on the subject of the FERC 4, what was the final resolution of that? If we can bring people up to date.
Well, it was interesting. So actually, the trial was going to be on June 21st of last year, and that was more than a year after the arrest. They twisting in the wind, and when I say twisting in the wind, that means that the government was sending us pictures that were
Oh, you there?
before the trial, and then we got a message that says, "Hey guys and girls, we're going to drop this case, and that's the end of it." So they dropped it at the very last minute. So all of our preparation was for now. Although I learned a lot about how the legal process works, and none of the four of us regret having done this because it was a phenomenal training.
Right.
But it didn't happen.
And who were the FERC 4 again? It was you.
It was me. It was two women and two guys. A person from France originally who teaches French at Johns Hopkins. One of my friends who calls himself a recovered lawyer. He used to be a lawyer, but he's no longer practicing. And the other person was a woman from D.C. at the time who was involved as a quote-unquote bureaucrat in environmental issues. I don't know precisely what she did.
Right.
And we started as 7 people, but 3 of us decided, you know what, we don't have time to go to court, and it's too dangerous. So it was originally the Sidewalk 7, and then it became FERC 4.
All right. So, you folks also, and I believe this may have been Fossil-Free Rhode Island, that engaged in civil disobedience at the compressor station as well, correct?
Well, Fossil-Free Rhode Island participated in several things. So Lisa Petrie actually was arrested at the State House because she said, "I'm not going to leave here until I can convince Gina Raimondo that she should stop her support for," I think at the time it was the power plant. And I got arrested and there was an action organized by FANG at the time in Sheldon Whitehouse's office, basically saying, "I'm going to leave if the senator changes his position on fracked gas," which he considers to be what he calls a bridge fuel. In other words, we'll get off fossil fuels, but we'll go via natural gas. And the science of that is really bad. But he can't take the position that I take, so we tried to force him to accept it. And guess what? He didn't. And so I was arrested there. And then, as you say, there was another FANG event that happened in Burrville where a pediatrician from Boston and I tied ourselves together, and the whole combination was locked to the front gate of the compressor station. And so, yeah, those are the actions that I've
And yet they continue to, it's this slowly moving snowball, if you will, that despite all the heat and despite all the opposition, continues to try to move inexorably forward with their vision, which is really becoming complete in front of the, in the citizens' eyes. I mean, it's become obvious to all of us that they simply will not go away unless they're completely crushed.
When you say they, are you talking about the government side?
I'm talking about the whole twisted mess. And maybe you can help us sort of separate this, because on one hand you've got Invenergy. On the other hand, when I look at the different players involved, you've got Invenergy, National Grid, you've got the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, that the FERC people. You've got the state level approval board that seems to have, well, it doesn't seem to, under its current formation, which has been worked on, if you will, but under its current formation seems to have a three-person body, seems to have sole domain over energy production in this state, or new energy production in this state, and a body that was appointed by a governor who takes direct campaign contributions from the very people in front of the body, and somehow that's not seen as a conflict of interest, and there is no effort to recuse or abstain from these proceedings. You've just this whole, I think of that terrible image of that mess of plastic out in the South Pacific. I forget the term for it offhand, but it takes on that same look to me, where you've got this massive twisted garbage floating together to form a block which is obsessed with 18th and 19th century energy delivery systems because of their ability to profit from them. I don't know how else to put it.
Well, I agree with the picture. You call it a gyre, right? It sucks you into it.
Right.
And we're collectively being sucked into it. At some point, I think this is a literal quote from Bill McKibben, who was the guy who started 350.org.
Right.
He put it in a simple sentence. The fossil fuel companies have more money than God. And that's what drives it. And you see it in the election campaigns. What drives the election campaign? Money, money, money. The whole thing is up for sale. You see, Gina Raimondo gets $250,000 from a company that calls itself Protect the Kids or something like that, and it's a fossil fuel company. I mean, you can't make this stuff up, really, and it's everywhere, wherever you look. And you mentioned the grid. Yes, it's an ancient grid, and it's been designed to supply power centrally. In Burrowville, there are 2 power plants, and then there are a couple more, but it's a centrally organized grid. It looks sort of like a star, where there's the center of the star and then all the rays coming out, but there are a couple of stars tied together. Now, if you want to turn to a green system, then you could generate power in your house. I could. People down the street could. And you don't have to be a physicist to realize that the network that will do that looks totally different than something that's basically a bunch of little stars. This is a diffuse system. And that's why National Grid is afraid, because they're afraid that we say, hey, wait a second, I'm transporting power from my system to my neighbor because the neighbor is in the shade and doesn't generate power. Why on earth do I have to pay National Grid for the power line?
Right.
So, they see their central position being threatened by the whole change that has to come with a green power system. And that's behind it. And the same thing applies to the fossil fuel companies. If it's all sun, wind, and water, well, what are you going to do with your gas and your oil? Well, people, of course, claim that Obama was fighting a war on coal. Well, guess what? He wasn't. The people who were drilling for gas were fighting a war on coal. So coal went by the wayside, but it might come back if we run out of fracked gas and fracked oil, because those wells die very rapidly. So, you know, it's simple in some sense, namely, you summed it up perfectly, but there's so many parts to this and so many parts that tie into our political system. And the people who are on the Supreme Court, I mean, who is paying for them to be there? This Kavanaugh person, I mean, somebody mentioned that the kind of money that was behind it. Well, I saw a picture of his face. It was not pretty. So it's everywhere, and yet there are more of us than there are of them, and they know it.
You mentioned, you know, and we're kind of dancing around the elephant in the room, and the fact that it's election time.
Yes.
And you've got really the interesting prospect that in both major political parties, you've got opponents primarying, in one case, an astonishingly wealthy incumbent. You've got people primarying the party establishment candidates. The fact that that's happening at any level brings joy to me, because that says that the hidebound party structure in this state is starting to crumble, and that the asylum may allow, in fact, be forced to, not allow, but is being forced to allow the participants, if you will, to at least begin some voice. What strikes you, or what's provocative, do you think, about the current range of gubernatorial candidates? Have you been following them?
I have been sort of following them, but I have lost my confidence in the political process, because it has been corrupted from the top down, and it's not been corrupted by the Democrats or but it's being corrupted by them together. And you know it. I mean, you're a third-party person. I'm a third-party person, and as a third party, you have to spend all your money on lawsuits because they make your life impossible, and all sorts of ridiculous things. I mean, we have to collect 1,000 signatures to get Pat Fonts on the ballot. I mean, she has a couple of people working for her, going from door to door to door for doing something ridiculous. And so I have no confidence in that process. I always vote, and they give me this sticker that says I vote, and I say, no, thank you. If you give me a sticker that says I have no choice, I'll wear the suit too at the same time.
Right.
So I have no confidence. At the same time, I'm happy that people are participating in the process. You know, different people have different skills. This is not something that floats my boat. But in the current system, we have to take it over somehow, and this is one of the ways that plays a role. So I'm contradicting myself a little bit, I know.
No worries. Folks, if you're just joining us, Dr. Peter Nightingale, he's a professor of physics at the University of Rhode Island, and he is a leadership figure and a true selfless advocate on behalf of the environment in a number of organizations. Too many to list, but I like to always try. The FERC 4, Raging Grannies, Fossil Free Rhode Island, the FANG Collective, No LNG and PVD, you know, the intimately involved in the fight against, as we say here on the coalition, Invenergy.
Can I interrupt for a second?
Sure, of course.
As far as FANG is concerned, I participated in a couple of actions, but I'm not on the board. I don't even know whether they have a board. But the other ones are correct. And in terms of the Raging Grannies, we call ourselves Granarchy. I don't know whether we have a board either. But I'm certainly one of the people who participate. We make decisions actually by consensus, so we don't really need a board.
Right. I mean, and as someone who has, even in the time since we've last spoken on the airwaves, who is moving closer to anarchist, I call myself a minarchist right now, but that's even starting to crumble. You know,
say that again.
I consider myself a minarchist right now, and in the libertarian planet, we've got all sorts of references in terms to different levels of anarchy. You know, it's interesting because polite society has got this one slot for anarchy. When we drill down on it, we see 1,000 shades of gray, even underneath the A. I'm Americus, which means I believe in absolutely minimal government. You know, that essentially the enforcement of property rights contracts, and well, that's about it. Because I just see the power of government, the coercive power of government, being used not to defend people and their property rights and their right to freedom and safety, being aided by the government, but I see the government aiding and abetting organizations that would, quite frankly, use government as a tool, as a wedge, from which they can promote these type of activities. You know, it's no shock that if you look at the agencies that are supposed to protect us in all these cases, the Attorney General's office, the federal, you know, the original FERC people, the statewide panel on the EFSB, the Energy Facility Sightings Board. These were all organizations created by government at one point or another, I believe, by people of goodwill, who thought that these organizations would in fact protect people. And as a libertarian who leaning towards anarchy, quite frankly, particularly in the case of the Attorney General's office, it has not only done nothing to protect people, quite frankly, it is a tool by the elite to be used against people and against their property rights and against their personal you know, right to freedom and right to individual choice and self-determination. So you know, in the current reign right now, there's a lot of hue and cry about creating an Inspector General's job, and whereas I don't doubt that in the case of the IG, the first one or two people who are being talked about, you know, captaining that ship are people of high integrity and great intent and wonderful work ethic. As is always the case, it's what's going to happen 10 years from now when the hue and cry is going down, and will there be another lethal weapon, you know, under the guise of government, be aimed right at our personal rights? And
well, yeah.
That, you know, it's funny, you and I, when we first met a couple of years ago, we talked about, you know, that confluence of libertarianism and the progressive movement over certain issues, and it's these anonymous acronyms that are running across EFSB, DEM, AG, IG, EIO, that FERC.
EFSB.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, I agree with you. I could call myself an anarchist, but I don't like that word because it's associated with bomb throwing, and I tend to be nonviolent. Right. So I call myself a libertarian socialist. So the libertarian part we have in common, because I believe things should grow from the bottom up rather than from the top down. And you know, any libertarian, if I formulated that generally, would probably agree with me. But I think we might differ in some points in terms of property rights. I think property is important, but when people work in a place, it should be their collective property. It should not be the property of the boss who bosses everybody around. But well, that's why I'm a strong believer in cooperatives, where people say, I work here, I own the place, and my coworkers and I have different skills, but we respect each other. And that doesn't fit into any system, whether it's a government at the top and the people at the bottom, or a company with a CEO and the workers underneath. In that sense, I think we're basically talking from the same perspective.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So it's clear that Gina Raimondo is and I'll use my words, I'm not going to, well, feel free to chime in. The words I use are amoral fraud, because I believe there's a complete absence of any moral structure there. I believe her to be perhaps a representation of a scary new form of politician, and that is not the, you know, the old school. You had the the speakers in a state like Rhode Island who generationally were all powerful. The guys like, you know, the Prince of, what was it, Jorge and Philippe referred to, you know, the Rhode Island right parody, political parodists, referred to a guy named DeAngelis as the Lord of Darkness and the and Halitosis Hall, and they had cute nicknames for people who run up right now to the current speaker. Those aren't the people that are really I'm afraid of anymore. It's a combination really of corporatist government officials like Gina Raimondo, who I believe see tremendous profit potential in controlling government, hiding behind or bearding themselves with the notion that they're progressives, when in fact there's no attempt to have any shared distribution of rights or privileges or profits, or there's no desire to have a cooperative form of government, as you point out, or a cooperative form, I should say, of self-governance. It's really an understanding that in a centrally planned economy that there is significant wealth at stake, significant money to be had by controlling the mechanisms of that planned economy. And the desire to promulgate a planned economy is not out of a desire to create any sense of social justice or equal distribution or redistribution of income. It's simply a way to personally profit from it. And that, to me, is why I find Governor Raimondo and her ilk to be, quite frankly, to be horrifying. And I think they represent the single biggest threat to democracy, to a republican democracy, whatever you want to call our way of government right now, whatever it is versus what it claims to be. I see people like her as by far and away the single biggest threat. And while conservatives fret over the growing progressive influence in a state like Rhode Island, and while progressives fret over the clown prince, the orange Cheeto, the orange Jesus, the Trump, all right? While we fret over each other and division is caused amongst two groups, and I'm certainly no fan of the orange Cheeto, in the meantime, quietly in the back, inch by inch, slowly they creep, the Gina Raimondos of the world, who, in conjunction with the big banks and the banksters, as we like to call them on the coalition, who, again, I'm not into the crazy conspiracy theories because I don't think it's really a crazy conspiracy theory. It's just a bald-faced attempt to hijack a significant part of the American economy, which is government-directed, and use it for your own personal aggrandizement. That's why I point out that the Gina Raimondos of the world are the ones that we really need to focus our energies in opposing.
Well, I agree to a large extent with what you're saying. I don't know what goes on in people's heads. I know what they do, and at the level of what they're doing, I totally agree with you. But I think that in some sense, it's perhaps even worse. They have bought into, well, there's a term by a political scientist called Sheldon Wolin, who died maybe 1 or 2 years ago. He talks about inverted totalitarianism. And if you want to summarize what that means, it's actually quite simple. It means we have people for the economy rather than economy for the people. And so, in some sense, anybody in the system is a slave of the system. We've lost control over it. And in some sense, I'm willing to believe that a lot of these corporate Democrats, of which Gina Raimondo is clearly one, that they truly have bought into a view of the world which operates this way. Margaret Thatcher said there is no alternative. And they will never quote her on that and say that they believe it, but that's what they're doing. They say this capitalist system where the people with the most money determine who the next person is going to be elected, who own everything. I mean, Jeff Bezos is an example of that. It's insane that somebody owns Amazon, which basically owns, I don't know what fraction of the economy, but a large fraction, and then has a newspaper to boot. Why? Because he has the money. I mean, this is not necessarily government, but it's economy ruling people. And yes, Bezos is happy, but you know what? People have done studies, and it turns out if you have less than something like, say, $75,000, you are occasionally in trouble. If you have less than $30,000, you're really in trouble. If you have more than, say, $100,000 per year as income, it doesn't add one iota to your happiness. It's become a game for itself, and I don't know whether yeah, there is an element of greed, but it's more greed for power than greed for worldly goods. I think, you know, all those things run together, of course, but
right.
So yeah.
I mean, you know, if you go back and, you know, it's interesting because you and I are of a generation where we still remember, and you know, you know, you in particular understand the mechanics of Brezhnev era Soviet Union, where you had, on one hand, you had the, and I always mispronounce this, but the apparatchiks, where you had, you know, the government occupying essentially the 1%, the people who were the most protected, the most highly compensated in terms of actual livable income, usable income, and were afforded a lifestyle that, quite frankly, the rest of society wasn't. I believe firmly that we are starting to lurch towards that here, where there is a controllers of the economy who are, quite frankly, working hard to crush and create more barriers to entry for an emergent entrepreneurial class to challenge them.
I totally agree, and you know, that is actually something that Warren had in mind when he talked about inverted totalitarianism. I mean, I read some of his books, and he started saying, look, if you think that the United States is the same as the Soviet Union, you're missing something. It's not. Because in the Soviet Union, certainly during the Stalin days, there was Stalin at the top with a bunch of friends who benefited from the system, and he was top down. And you know, when people talk about socialism, I call myself a libertarian socialist. As far as I'm concerned, socialism comes in two flavors. It's top-down, Soviet Union, which I do not like any more than you like it, and it comes in the flavor of bottom-up, and then it's more libertarian. And this is basically what he was hinting at. So yes, it is totalitarian in the sense that we've lost control over the system and we're slaves, but it's inverted because it's not the Soviet Union or Hitler Germany or Franco Spain or Mao China. Those are top-down totalitarian states. That's not what we have here, and yet in many ways it's the same.
The same impact on folks in the underclass, that's for sure.
Exactly.
Right. I mean, it's just that it's become from it's not a strong single cult of personality anymore, because you know, and herein lies the danger. By the way, since we're off into the philosophical weeds, herein lies the danger, in my mind, the difference between, say, a Trump and a Mike Pence. Donald Trump has become a parody of himself, clearly the clown prince of, I'm not sure what movement. He's become an object of derision and parody around the world and in significant parts of the United States. And quite frankly, he remains, if you're a corporatist Democrat, easy to fundraise off of and easy to make fun of. Folks need to understand that if he goes bye-bye, as gratifying as it may be, that leaves someone like a Mike Pence, who is, besides being nuts, just plain old nuts, is quite frankly, because of his bland, you know, homogenous nature, and that he just, you know, people in the Republican Party will point to him as being a gentleman. Frankly, I don't believe people who prescribe electroshock to folks in the LGBT community as a gentleman, but you know, that's just me. You know, but you know.
Actually, you know, it's not just you. I was about to interrupt and say, hey, maybe we could find something that we could fight about because we end up agreeing. I know that my friends, a lot of my friends, were saying, impeach Trump, and my feeling was, you know, with Trump you have the clown that you see. Pence is so much more slick than Trump is. I'd rather have Trump, well, you described it exactly. That's why I was thinking, let's find something that we can argue about.
Well, but again, this is the confluence of groups of people who engage in thought about the process, not simply willing to accept whatever they're spoon-fed at any one given moment by an increasingly complacent media who, You know, much like in other generations. The notion, by the way, that the media is all of a sudden sold out is a 21st century phenomenon is ludicrous. I mean, you go back to the 17th, I should say the 18th century and the 19th century, and you'll see that media hasn't always largely been owned by, you know, whether it be the robber barons or, you know, the current technocrats. You know, like you said, we've gone from the Gettys to the Bezos to the, I mean, you name the historical figure, the Rockefeller. They've always owned the media.
Well, you know, I don't know when you saw that movie. I think it's called The Post. It's about the Washington Post when they had to decide whether they were going to publish Daniel Ellsberg's
the Pentagon Papers. Right.
Did you see that one?
Yeah.
Well, you know, it's basically what you're describing, and whatever her name was did the right thing, but these were people with money. They were friends, if I remember correctly, with Robert McNamara, who was he was in the Johnson administration.
Secretary of Defense.
You know, this is a small group of people who own the media. And when was this? It was about 50 years ago, right? Well, it's 72, 73, I don't remember precisely.
But moving on 50 years ago, yeah.
That was true then, and it's still true right now. And actually, talking about Ellsberg, I don't know whether you read his latest memoir, which is really a revelation, because it's about nuclear weaponry. And, you know, we should think about that in Rhode Island, because every time I see a key laying of yet another nuclear submarine, I see Gino Raimondo and the four guys that supposedly represent us in Congress smiling there and saying hallelujah. And we have been lucky. I mean, Ellsberg, when he copied all of his papers, copied two sets of papers. One is the Pentagon papers, and the other were about, he was a nuclear planner, and he copied that stuff, and that blew off in a hurricane at some point. But he wrote a memoir about that.
Right.
And it's absolutely unbelievable what people were talking about. You know, there was one plan, which is if there's going to be a war with the Soviet Union, just for good measure, we're going to wipe out China. The number of deaths that they were talking about was 600 million. You know, I grew up Jewish, and for me the number 6 million has a special ring. Mm-hmm. This is 100 times that number. And this was the only plan. And you ask the upper military man, what do you think of this? Would it be possible to say just nuke the Soviet Union and leave the rest of the Chinese out of it because it's none of their business? And the answer is, no, we can't do that. That would make the plan too complicated. You're talking about almost 1 billion people. It's too complicated to plan for that. I'm laughing, but it's not a laughing matter. And, you know, this is the craziness that happens when you get a bunch of people who lock themselves up in their bunker and think that they're running the world.
Yeah.
I mean, it's crazier than what we mentioned so far, but I think it's the same mindset. And you hear what you remember William J. Perry. He was the Secretary of Defense during Clinton 1.
Right.
You remember his name?
Mm-hmm.
Well, it doesn't matter. Anyway, he talks about this stuff, and he says the danger that we all risk at this point is nuclear annihilation, not because Mr. Trump blows a gut, but because of some idiotic software glitch, some bird in the wrong place mistaken for an incoming missile. And those things have happened.
Well, I mean, you know, Hawaii just a few months ago. You know, quite frankly, it's you know, now you're the physicist and I'm not, but there's a certain degree of mathematical certainty that it's going to happen. It's simply almost impossible that it doesn't. Well,
that's the famous what is it called? Is it the Peters principle? No, it's Murphy's law,
right.
which says if something can go wrong, it will go wrong. And what it really means is exactly what you said. If something has a small chance of happening, if you wait long enough, the chance that it happens goes to 1. It will happen in the long run. That's what it means. It's not, you know, people usually say I have a slice of bread with jam on one side and nothing on the other side, and I drop it, and all you'll see here is Murphy's principle. It falls on the sticky side. Yeah. It just, in the long run, if something can happen, it will happen. Yeah, exactly. And people just completely ignore that. And, you know, you say, well, you're a physicist. It's true. So I'm interested in numbers. If you know the power of those weapons, it's absolutely staggering. One of these thermonuclear bombs produces as much bang for a lot less buck, actually, as all the bombs used in World War II. I mean, can you imagine one bomb versus everything used in World War II? I can say it, but I can't even begin to imagine what that means.
Right. I mean, you know, you understand the, like, take for example Dresden. You know, if you've ever seen the videos of the bombing of Dresden, you understand what a scorched earth really is. You know, I mean, Dresden, it was decided would be essentially wiped from the face of the earth, and yet you're right. One thermonuclear device can be the equivalent of that, and yet somehow repeated confrontation is seen as desirable in foreign policy.
I know. Well, actually, you know, I don't remember off the top of my head the number of deaths in Dresden and the number of deaths in Hiroshima. Probably Dresden was more like 50,000 and Hiroshima was 100,000. The bombs that we've developed are 1,000 times the power of what was dropped in Hiroshima. And those are, I mean, those are not the ones that airplanes fly around with. They're only 100 times as big. But even 100 Dresdens or 100 Hiroshimas, or for that matter, 100 Tokyos, if you like. The number of deaths in Tokyo was about the same as in Hiroshima. Something that people tend to forget, but that was not a party.
Right. Well, we've gotten off the track, and I want to get us back on a sec, but I want to take a moment to take a break to salute one of our sponsors. Folks, if you're just joining us, you are listening to the Coalition, loud and proud, outrage porn-free, civilly disobedient media. Joining me live on the line through the miracle of Skype telephone is Dr. Peter Nightingale, physicist at the University of Rhode Island and environmental warrior. We've detailed in depth the number of organizations that he's been intimately involved in here in trying to steer our environmental policy to some level of rationality in this state. And his impact has been profound, but the challenges continue. This hour is sponsored by Yacht Club Soda, yachtclubbottlingworks.com. Rhode Island's boutique soda, before we even knew we needed a boutique soda. All natural ingredients. Folks, you know, we're into the autumn now. It's tailgate season. Whether it be your local high school football team, the college team, if you're going to see the Patriots tomorrow, you will spend an inordinate amount of time and money, you know, for your family and your loved ones, your friends, to prepare them delicious meals. Why settle for the refinery sodas? Why settle for plastic, liquid plastic in a bottle of plastic when you can have literally the finest soda alive? Natural ingredients, real ginger, real vanilla, root beer that is just delightful and not the sugary, sweet, fructose-laden health bombs that are sold on yuck. So if you're going to take the time to prepare those meals, serve them with beverages from the very best. YachtClubBottlingWorks.com. Again, wonderful people who take the time to sponsor a variety of groups like ours in the community. It takes a lot of bravery to support independent media. Not only just to spend the money, but also, quite frankly, to associate yourself with organizations whose politics might be non-conventional, might be considered aggressive, in some cases might be considered threatening. So, folks, they deserve your support. Yacht Club Soda. Folks, again, on the line with me right now is Dr. Peter Nightingale, University of Rhode Island physicist, environmental warrior. We've gone into great detail tonight about both economic philosophy and environmental philosophy. We've been going through, I guess, sort of a timeline informally as to how did we get there from here. It is election week. The primaries are upon us. They represent critical choices. This is probably the most contentious primary season I've seen in the 30 or so years that I've lived here in Rhode Island. And contentious not only in the noise that's being generated, contentious not only in the inter-party wars that your tax dollar is supporting, that's a whole other conversation, but clearly, in all cases, they represent distinct, stark choices in terms of personality, leadership skills, and quite frankly, the philosophies of the individuals involved. One cannot say that the three people running for the Democratic nomination for your governorship, I don't think it's possible that they could be any more different. Of course, regular listeners to this show know how we feel about the governor. And so to that end, I implore you to vote and follow your conscience, particularly if your conscience leads you in a different direction, I should say, than Governor Gina Raimondo. Her repeated pans to the environmental community, simultaneously the other Gina taking in most recent case a $250,000 super PAC contribution from an organization that is clearly just tied right to the heart of legacy power, of old school power production, is breathtaking. Not just because of the amount of money involved, that's staggering, but to be routinely accepting money from really environmental criminals who are not giving her the money because they think she's a swell gal, not giving her the money because of her infamous pot roast that she made in a commercial one time. They are giving her the money to influence public policy as part of what Dr. Nightingale and I have discussed as a long-term trend to use a portion of the Democratic Party to create a form of hybrid corporate politics where essentially large corporations, nothing wrong with large corporations if they behave properly, but large corporations will use their ability to influence elections to effectively begin to control significant segments of the public economy. It is, shall we say, disquieting, to say the very least. So you've got two very clear choices.
I totally agree.
Matt, you've got Matt Brown, you've got Spencer Dickinson. Again, those two gentlemen, I believe, are honorable and represent distinct choices for the Democratic electorate. Or, Peter, let's just say hypothetically you were an independent who happened to be in charge of a third party, and let's just say you decided to, hypothetically, of course, I'm speaking for a friend, was going to vote in the Democratic Party primary this week because he could, and was doing whatever he could to make mischief against the corporatist Democratic elite. That, of course, is a hypothetical, Peter. I can't imagine that actually happening.
I usually go to the Democratic primaries and then I become a Democrat, and on the way out I immediately disaffiliate. They love that. But you know, I was thinking while you were talking about all these things, about what we have been covering, and we covered a lot of ground, and a lot of it is pretty bleak. But you know, Wednesday when we were at DEM, to come back where we started. Right, and that's important. I want to get back to the celebratory aspect of tonight. So we've been through, we've been to Bleak House and beyond. Now let's have some fun and put a smile on a chain. Talk about these kids. Talk about your organization, and just lay it all out for us. Okay, well, that was where I was going. Actually, you know, we were at DM at 3 in the afternoon, and at 2 in the afternoon, a kid got killed outside Central High in Providence. So it was a sad day, and actually some of the journalists I spoke to said, you know, when that happened at 2 o'clock, it was clear that we were not going to pay any attention to what you were doing. This is the news. Well, okay, that's how the news cycle goes. But so there was this very sad moment, and I was personally witnessing something where kids felt empowered to speak their minds, to speak truth to power, and it wasn't just the 11-year-old kid who did that, who called for revolution, but they had very powerful statements well, this guy wasn't there, but he's a fisherman's son, and from a family where the dad no longer can make money because, well, you know, all the lobsters have gone north. It's getting too warm here. And 25 years ago, he told DEM, there is trouble. The fisheries can no longer live. And the answer he got from DEM is, oh, you know, the information you're conveying to us is anecdotal. And so this kid wrote about that and saying, I hope that I will not be thrown away by DEM by being called anecdotal. So, you know, on the one hand, there is the very sad thing that happens, violent in Providence. And at the other side, there are kids who take control of their lives and do a marvelous job. I mean, one of the students from URI was the MC at the press conference, and she did an incredible job. I was sort of at the end, icing on the cake, because I dealt with the technicalities, which I've sort of explained at the beginning. But, you know, life is complicated. It's dark on one side, and it's light at the same time at another place. And so I think that for me, that was positive, in spite of all the misery that happens. It was a very positive experience to be able to create this document that we've generated. Actually, if people want to see it, they can go to our website, which is called naturestrustri.org. Nature's Trust is all strung together, no apostrophes, no nonsense, just naturestrust.org. And people can look at the at the statements of the kids. They can look at the press release. They can look at the document that we submitted to DEM, 200 pages of interesting stuff. Was quite depressing at times to write that, to see how long we've known about these problems. But on the whole, you know, it's been a work of love for me, while depressing at the same time.
How did these young people come together? I mean, what was talk a little bit more about the organization and how did they all coalesce?
Well, that was actually not all that easy. Some when this started were at South Kingstown High School, and I went and gave a presentation on what we were doing, and two of the kids in that class ended up joining. There was a kid who originally lived in Burrillville, and we got into contact with her because, well, the way everyththing works in Rhode Island, because somebody knew somebody. And
right.
So we got hooked up with her. There is one graduate student in the physics department. I think may have been at a time that well, I'm not quite sure. Students are, of course, aware that I've done some stuff which isn't perfectly legal, and so I have some credibility with some, and not. And I mentioned, this is what we're going to do. Is anybody interested? I typically don't talk about these things in classes, but afterwards, sometimes I do. And he said, well, you know, I might be interested, and my girlfriend might be interested too. So they joined. There was a student who was an undergraduate at PC. How on earth did we? Oh, I know how. We keep coming back to governors. So in August last year, there was a governors conference in Providence. I mean, the National Governors Association, or something like that. And we had a protest outside, and this student spoke, and I went up to her and said, hey, you gave a really impressive speech. I think it was the first time she ever did it. I mean, this kid is natural. And I said, this is what we're doing. If you're interested, why don't you join us? So she did. Well, that's, yeah, basically who we're forgetting. Well, yes, one of the kids we met. Now, I mentioned Mary Christina Wood, this professor on the West Coast. Well, we had a video conference with her in May, and we basically sent out a whole bunch of invitations. Come and join us. It was a youth conference on climate change or something like that. I don't remember the title. And this kid and his mom showed up, and afterwards we spoke to them, and they said, well, we'd like to join. So, you know, it's serendipity more than anything else.
So now, give us a lowdown on the petition itself. So the petition itself is it's a series of anecdotes, or give us an overview of that.
No, the petition starts to say who the petitioners are, and it's called a petition for rulemaking, which means we're asking DEM to use its authority to put rules in place, and so that's the request. But it's really a legal procedure. So it starts with a cover page that mentions the names of the kids, and Nature's Trust Rhode Island is an organizational member, and Sisters of Mercy Ecology. Did you ever interview Mary Pendergast?
No, she's on the list. I've never been able to get her to. I've never been able to nail that down.
Well, it'll happen. I'm sure it'll happen, and she would be wonderful to give her perspective. Anyway, so her organization is another organizational member, and that's basically for continuity, so that we have kids who are at the beginning of their life and they're here today, and then they're God knows where 2 or 3 years from now, because the legal processes take time. So that's the first part, and then there is a part that specifies the rules that we ask for, and I explained what that are, namely, make sure that you count emissions that are in-state and that are out-of-state, and that you count methane correctly and don't kick the can down the road for 100 years. And so it's that part, and it says if you put anything in place, you have to respect the principle of environmental justice. In other words, and I know we've talked about this in the past, engage in environmental racism as is happening in Fields Point right now, where you're putting more pollution into a neighborhood where asthma rates are the highest in the States. Well, you know, you've heard how bad that is. So there's a principle of environmental justice, and that's called the precautionary principle, which basically says better safe than sorry. There's a lot that we know about the science predicting when we fall off the climate cliff, whether that will be 10 years from now or 30 years from now. Making that prediction is virtually impossible. So in that case, what do? Well, anybody says if you're not sure that something is not safe, then don't do it, right? You're not going to barrel at 100 miles an hour down a road if you're not 100% sure that the bridge at the end is still up there,
right,
or down there, I should say. So those are the basic principles that we tell them that they should adhere to. Then there is a section with all sorts of definitions of technical concepts. I will skip over that. There is a section in there that basically it's Q&A explaining in simple terms what we're asking for and pointing out that we're probably among the most advanced. Well, the request that we put in is one of the more advanced ones in the United States. We go further in terms of all these things than most people do, because they tend to focus more on carbon dioxide. And we say, no, Rhode Island uses 95% of the energy to generate electricity is natural gas. You can't just pretend that that doesn't exist. You have to count it and count it correctly. And then there is an overview of the science, because there are about 100 science. Just a review, a rather thorough review of climate science. And because we think not too many people are actually reading that, we've condensed it into a couple of pages, summing up the key points. So the total is about 200 pages of stuff with something like 500 scientific and other references in there, and details of how you actually exactly measure the emissions, how we think they should be measured. So it's a very technical document. I mean, it starts out being technical in the legal sense, that we spell out all the parts of the statutes that govern DEM and the Constitution in Rhode Island, everything that's relevant. So that part was put together by one of our legal volunteers, and the science part, I did a lot of that, of course. And what else is there?
Well, now,
that's basically how it fits together. So it's technical legally, and it's technical scientifically, and then there's stuff put in there to make it somewhat accessible to the average person.
What's been the reaction from DEM? Have they embraced it? Are they at least taking a moment to contemplate it? How have they responded?
Well, I could give you a flippant but true answer, which is, while we were having our press conference, they locked the door on us. That's really true. And actually, you know, this is something else, because you're concerned about how government works. It turns out that we were outside because we didn't want to run interference with them, or them run interference with them. And we were outside, and some of the private people who, the security guards came up to us and said, "Oh, you can't be out here. This is private property." And well, we don't know. We did go inside, and then some other security people showed up and said, "You can't be inside." So here you have a public DEM office. You can leave because of the privatization has taken place. They locked the door in the middle, and that is all true. But it's not an answer to what your question was, namely, have you responded? Well, you know, they cannot. The law gives them 30 days to respond, and they have had 2 work days. There is no possible response that they could have come up with, even if they agree with us for 100% at the end. So the process will be there after 30 days, then they either turn us down or they go along, which is very unlikely, the going along. And if they turn us down or don't respond at all, which is basically the same, we are planning to appeal that, and we'll take them to court in the Rhode Island forests.
I hope you'll get me involved in that, because that's a moment I want to see, because I'm reflecting simultaneously on, here you have these young people, and you know, the current school of thought is that the youth of America, the young people, aren't involved, don't care, are only on the internet playing video games and working on social media. So now you have this pretty wide group of kiddos, some college outer, some junior high, who have put in a remarkable investment of time, worked with adult and been mentored in the community, both in the scientific and the legal and the political community, who have immersed themselves in a sophisticated issue and have helped put together this great body of work, only to literally, have the door slammed in their face.
Well, you know, it's interesting. I keep coming back to our 11-year-old Jeremy, who is a real warrior, not warrior, with W-A-R.
Right.
What he said, and it ties straight into what you said. Here's one paragraph of what he said. If you continue, he's talking to the adults of Rhode Island, if you continue to destroy our planet, we will have nothing. We will not simply stay quiet and play our video games all day. We will stand up. I will stand up. How much closer could it be to what you just said than this?
Right. No,
isn't that amazing?
Absolutely. No, I'd love to have. You know, one of the things we can work on. You know, and let's do it sooner rather than later. When you get close to them having to respond to you, I'd love to have all of you here in studio, and we could talk about it in person, and bring the kids in, if with your parents' approval, and let them. I'd love to hear their experiences in doing this, and what their thoughts are, as they get deeper and deeper into the political reality surrounding it, because we need to give voice to young people who are concerned and not willing to just sit back, but actually engage in some of the hard, because that's what's remarkable about this effort. It's easy for kids, for anybody actually of any age, to get together and pontificate and do the protest thing. It's a lot harder to do the quiet, difficult work in the background, to pull together the information, the detail. That's real work, and that speaks to a commitment both from the adults who are involved in this, but also to the kids themselves. So I want to invite you to bring them in studio, and we'll have some fun one Friday night, and let's enjoy the fruits of their efforts.
I will not leave a stone unturned to take you up on that invitation.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. That is a wonderful invitation, and I'd love to have the kids on there. And as you say, of course, parents have to approve this, but I've seen the parents, and I don't think I'll have much of a problem. But anyway, I'm going to convey that actually as soon as I get off the phone.
No, I mean,
I'll send an email out to them. The press coverage has actually been quite remarkable, and so this will be the icing on the cake.
No, and bring the parents by. We can, you've been to, you've hung out with us. We backstage, if you will, and I say that with a smile. We can have quite the party here. Yacht Club soda for everybody. How about that?
Oh, it sounds wonderful. No, if we do it, it's going to be the kids. I don't want to have my face on there at all. At all. This is not a dogma, but it really, as the press conference did, it should focus on the kids because it is their world that we're destroying. Mm-hmm. It really is.
No,
So yes.
Absolutely. Well, you've got this coming up. What else is on the horizon? Clearly we're coming into the election season. Really, we've been on a holding pattern with these primaries now for a few weeks.
Yes.
As of Wednesday, we will know exactly. This is like Survivor. The field gets winnowed down. We're down to 2 or 3 survivors in the process. I think it's at that point in time that we all collectively need to ramp up the pressure. They want this job. Damn it, make them earn it, and make them answer questions. They can't hide now, and obviously that's going to be a function of who wins these primaries. I honestly go into these primaries next week. If you had told me 60 days ago that these 2 primaries would be as closely fought as I believe they are right now, I would have thought that was preposterous. Mr. Brown, and I am not going to discount Mr. Dickinson's efforts, but because I believe both of them have waged heroic, epic battles, if you will, against overwhelming odds. So my hat's off to both of them. But it would become clear that there is, this ain't going to be, in the words of great Casey Stengel, or was it Yogi? I get them mixed up. This ain't going to be over till it's over. And but then again, like I said, at that moment in time, the real opportunity becomes apparent, because in all of these cases, it can be said that, particularly in the case of the 2 front runners, or the perceived front runners, Ms. Raimondo and Mr. Fogg, that they have catered to elements in their political organization in order to get the primary. Now, I believe in the case of Ms. Raimondo, and certainly in the case of Mr. Fung, if in fact they are victorious, they will try to lurch back to the center, to the nonsense and the pablum and the, and the cliches and the generalizations and the sorry rhetoric that is the hallmark of both of their current administrations, never mind what they want to do moving forward. And it's up to people like us to hold them accountable and to say, we want a clear vision for what you believe should be done about the climate here in Rhode Island. In my case, I work with a great group of people. We work very hard on fighting corporate welfare. I want a clear vision as to why you think we should continue in a state that's financially broken to write checks to large corporations to give them advantages on the playing field. It's as uncapitalistic as you could ever get, if that's a word. We need to understand where you stand on that, because it is not capitalism. It's a bastardization of capitalism to grant special privileges to the connected few. Listen, I'm going to leave you with a thought on the financial economic side that's going to horrify you. It's my understanding that, and I call this the Pawtucket Paw Sox Participation Awards. because they didn't get their baseball stadium. There is a travel agency that it was alleged in the Providence Journal that is going to be the recipient of a $1.2 million grant to go out and hire people. Why do we need to give a private for-profit business who's very established, or any private for-profit business, why do we need to give them taxpayer money to support their business? Their business should support itself or should go home. I don't discount the impact of employing Rhode Islanders, but at no level is it economically efficient for us simply to write checks to people who then go turn around and employ people. That's ludicrous. So, I mean, that's...
Well, and I agree, and actually they turn around and they blackmail you.
Right.
That's what they want, tax breaks, and then they say, if we don't get more tax breaks. I mean, it's the real record. I totally agree with you.
So we each share our appreciation for each other's battles, and I think we support each other and each other's battles, understanding that, we need to... All of these issues need to be addressed, and there isn't a simple reason why in a small state, Rhode Island, why we can't become simultaneously a centerpiece of free market success, where individuals are empowered to be successful as opposed to being bribed, and we can't. There's no reason why we can't be an environmental bellwether for the rest of the country. Our small size.
We have all the wind that it takes. We're in an excellent position, and people know it.
We have all the advantages. We've got the small scale, and we should be the poster children. Rhode Island should be a symbol for progress in all of this. And it's a stunning failure that in the year 2018, we have become nothing more than a bedroom community and a supplier of cheap labor for the Boston economy, when we should be leading the nation. And I believe we have the resources, we've got the people, the smarts, the technology. We've got everything here to do it. It's just a matter of us saying, "Damn it, we're gonna move it forward," regardless of what these cronies, what this circus we've got up on Smith Hill right now. So, listen.
Amen. I agree.
Well, listen, I want to thank you for coming on tonight on short notice. We've had people up. The joy of indie media is that you can't really schedule guests. It's a function of the news cycle. It's a function of just the chaos that is this state. We love it. It makes us crazy at the same time. But it was wonderful to catch up for you. And let's do this thing with the kiddos. Let's do it within the next couple of weeks, because the cliche is strike while the iron is hot. We need to use this, whatever media we can muster, and there's so much great independent media in the state. Steve Alquist does a wonderful job. I'd like to think we contribute here. It's Tony John. All these people just do this great stuff. So let's harness all of this power that in the aggregate makes us significant. And let's harness it to support these kids and get them the results that they quite frankly, they've earned.
Yeah, well, Steve Alquist was there, and he videotaped the whole press conference. Mm-hmm. Tim Faulkner was there. Alex Kufner was there. Ken Gravel from the Narragansett Times. They all did marvelous reporting, and it's marvelous to see. And thank you very much for the hospitality on your show. I loved catching up, as you said. That's good, because I think we're striving for the same thing. And not everything has to be literally the same to just agree about basic principles, right?
Exactly. I consider you a brother. I profound admiration for what you do. So again, have a wonderful night, and let's make a point of talking next week, and we'll keep moving this forward.
We will. Thanks again. It was a wonderful opportunity to catch up.
All right, folks. Dr. Peter Nightingale, University of Rhode Island physics professor, environmental warrior, justice warrior, involved in so many different issues, working for environmental justice here in the state of Rhode Island. As we like to say on the coalition, he is someone who clearly takes it very, very personally. We're going to catch up with him in the next couple of weeks with the kiddos, get him in the studio, and continue to bring up, whether it be the FERC 4, whether it be Invenergy, no LNG and PVD, whether it be, you name it, and God only knows what they've got on the horizon if they win this election. Because, I don't think it ends here. This is a slow burning incremental effort to essentially corporatize almost every aspect of our life that we hold near and dear, and damn it, we're not going to let it happen. We are the Coalition, loud and proud, outrage porn-free, civilly disobedient media broadcasting live on the Worldwide Coalition Network here at the GoLocal Live Broadcast Center, 90 Way Boston Street, in the heart of the city we love, Providence, Rhode Island. Facebook.com/The Coalition Radio, on the mighty Twitter at Coalition_radio, and of course the mothership, CoalitionRadio.us. And it will not die, our all apolitical, anti-billionaire baseball boys club Twitter feed at Pawtucket is home. Joining us in just a couple of minutes at the 8 o'clock hour is John Gonzalez. Of course, he is known as Standing Bear. He has been another giant nationally and locally working towards environmental justice. We're going to catch up with him because this is the kind of night we're all just kind of, the summer's over, time to reacquaint ourselves with old friends, re-engage, and let's fight the fight. Folks, stay tuned. We'll be right back. And we are the Coalition, loud and proud, outrage porn-free, civilly disobedient media, broadcasting live from the Worldwide Coalition Network here at the GoLocal Live Broadcast Center, 90 Way Boston Street, in the heart of the city we love, Providence, Rhode Island. Facebook.com/The Coalition Radio, on the mighty Twitter at Coalition_radio, and the mothership, coalitionradio.us. Joining us in just a moment is John Gonzalez, a.k.a. Standing Bear. We're going to catch up with him. At around 8:35 or so, Spencer Dickinson is a candidate for the Democratic nomination for the governorship of the great state of Rhode Island. He'll be joining us with a kind of a wrapping up. It's still the weekend, so there's plenty of time to campaign. But kind of for the coalition purposes, kind of a shout out to the audience and a statement of his philosophy and his beliefs. But it is with great pride that I talk to someone. We're catching up tonight. We just got off the phone with Dr. Peter Nightingale, someone who I also have a great deal of admiration for, someone who truly lives the life and is, again, a living symbol for environmental justice. And of course, I'm talking about John Gonzalez. He, of course, you name the conflict, you name the challenge, and well, he's literally there. Now, John, first of all, welcome back to the coalition. It's great to talk to you again. You're in Winnipeg right now?
Yes, I am in Winnipeg.
Holy cow.
Canada.
What's going on up in Winnipeg?
Well, you know, it was an interesting experience. I had gotten a call from a dear friend of mine, Myron Dewey, who asked me if I was drone ready, meaning he had an assignment for me, which was to go to Sequemic territory in BC, where the tiny house warriors were working in opposition against the Trans Mountain Kinder Morgan pipeline to prevent that pipeline from going through sacred grounds, ancestral ancient Sequemic territory, and also to prevent the Trans Mountain Kinder Morgan pipeline man camps, which have been popping up all across Turtle Island, which causes the rates to go up from 20 to over 200, and and of course increases the missing and murdered Indigenous women that we have occurring all over Turtle Island as well. And so after going to Sequemic territory, I made my way across the provinces to Cross Lake, where I've been adopted by the Pemichikamak tribal nation. And actually, my name has been changed. It's no longer Canadian with Masquerade Standing Bear. It is Standing White Eagle Feather Man.
Wow. How do you do it? And I'm looking at the whole range. First of all, the physical stamina involved in literally traveling some of the most beautiful, yet the word desolate is just too stark a word, but clearly, you're off the grid. You're not doing the tour of the continent, if you will. You are becoming part of the continent. How are the connections being made between these different indigenous families, these different indigenous cultures and groups as to these challenges? Is it a function of the web? Is there any central body that's sort of disseminating whatever resources are available? What we see evolving in front of our eyes and growing in front of our eyes is nothing less than a worldwide movement of indigenous peoples who are ultimately fighting back now against generations of this institutional climate warfare that's based on cronyism of these exclusive mineral and property rights by governments that have no moral right to do so. That's a mouthful. I probably did a terrible job of it, but I think you get the point.
Yeah, well, awareness is being raised for our environment now, and while there have been many environmentalists and conservationists throughout history, our message now is to honor and protect the land, is to honor and protect the people that grew from this land. So whether we're talking about the Narragansett and Wampanoag, Nipmuc tribes of the east, and we're talking about the Kalispel tribes to the west, and of course Standing Rock, drew a lot of global attention to not only the environment but the plight of our indigenous peoples. Mm-hmm. So my message is that, that we can do better, with respect to honoring the treaties and, recognizing that it's our indigenous communities that are the most impoverished, not only in the United States and Canada, South America, but all over the world.
Now, clearly there are a couple of principal players in this from a corporate perspective. Kinder is a company that, in its various forms, and I'm going to trivialize this and try and use a little dark humor, but if you're old enough to remember the original Star Trek, you'll remember one of the great episodes in Trekkie history was, of course, The Trouble with Tribbles. And The Trouble with Tribbles was started as that you had a handful of these tribbles, and I forget the circumstances, but if left alone and to their own devices, their population would explode. We see the same thing with these gas and oil partnerships that, again, use, in my words, not yours, but use crony governments, which really, in terms of the behavior, aren't that far removed from the goings-on in protectorates, both British, French, German, Dutch protectorates in the colonial period, prior to and in the immediate aftermath of World War II. They're using some of these same techniques to create these these organizations around the world with little or no respect for Native communities and their property rights and their human rights. So who are some of the players that we should start to pay attention to in the corporate world? Who should we wake up to?
Well, there's the Dakota Access Pipeline, there's Energy Transfer Partners, and the Bayou Bridge Pipeline is an example of that. There's been, the violence at Standing Rock has extended itself there as well. There's, of course, on the East Coast and in Rhode Island, there's Invenergy, which is a Chicago-based company, which has proposed a $1 billion dirty frac gas power plant for the middle of the woods in northwestern Rhode Island. There is the LNG liquefaction facility proposed by National Grid, in an area that's, experiencing already the highest incidences of asthma, cardiovascular and respiratory diseases. So my sort of motto is, and the thing I try to put out there is, bloom where you're planted. Find your watersheds, monitor your watersheds, and protect your watersheds, because the corporations won't do it. And, Trump has put a policy in place of energy dominance, and he's been pushing all of these fossil fuel infrastructures through. We have to, get on top of the game with respect to environmentalists, people that champion themselves as environmentalists. And I would include Gina Raimondo. I would also include Sheldon Whitehouse to say, it's time to step up to the plate for Black, brown, and indigenous communities and our most heavily impacted communities all across the country.
Right, because it's clear it's not only is it impacting indigenous communities in far-flung destinations, but it's impacting local communities here as well as far away as a mile or so down the road in South Providence. What is your strategy right now? Now, are you where are you drawing a line in the sand right now? Are you going to be staying in Winnipeg? What exactly is happening there?
Well, currently what I'm doing is I made it to Cross Lake, which is Comanche territory, and there they are, fighting desperately in opposition to the Gentech hydroelectric dam, which is the third largest storehouse of electricity in the world. What it has done is it has wreaked havoc with the water levels of Cross Lake. It has depleted the salmon, their natural food supply. It has become one of the most impoverished reservations in the world. I would say only the Pine Ridge Reservation would rival the disparity which is occurring there. And right now I am in, as I said, Winnipeg, and I'm working with Scout and Youth over there. They are learning, media documentary skills, filmmaking, And what we're trying to do is to teach our youth to help tell their story through indigenous eyes.
I'd love the opportunity to interview them or bring them at some point in the coming weeks on our show here up into Rhode Island. If you know, I'll put that invitation out there if you can get the technology lined up so that, as we like to say, through the miracle of Skype, we can bring you everyone, anywhere, anyplace, anyhow. So I'll throw that out there because we'd like to see your beaming face again, and we'd like to communicate directly with some of the young people that you're working with, because what's fascinating to me is it's sort of a surprise theme for tonight, whether it be up here in Rhode Island with Peter Nightingale and their group up here, and what your work right now in Canada. My fears, as I brought them up in the beginning of the show, are being largely allayed. You've got active engagement, involvement at a high level from very young people who are displaying a high degree of commitment to challenging causes that have no immediate happy resolution. I mean, these are long-term battles that you've fought and Peter Nightingale has fought, and clearly will continue to be fought. So I'll throw that invitation out there. How, it's unfortunately outside of the independent media, particularly the environmental media, so little is written about the conditions of Indigenous people, both here in the United States and particularly up in Canada. How would you, are they facing similar challenges up there as folks here are down in the United States?
Well, absolutely. I give for an example, in the United States, Pine Ridge is the second largest, and yet the most impoverished reservation in the country. Really, third world conditions exist out there. The average age for a male is 47 years old. The average age for a woman is 53. There are, the incidences of drug addiction, alcoholism, unemployment. It's all through the roof. So for me, it's not just a matter of drawing attention to an environment, but it's a matter of drawing attention to our most heavily impacted communities, which puts our Indigenous communities right there at the top. As far as our youth are concerned, I think it's a wonderful thing what Peter Nightingale is doing with naturestrust.org. I know that the late Robert Mallon was heavily involved in that. Right. And the importance there is that, it's the same thing as Standing Rock. Standing Rock began because our youth ran to Washington. And I always say that they lit a sacred fire whose embers are spreading all across the country and the world. And they're really the ones at the helm. They're the ones leading all of this. Mm-hmm. And so it's an honor to share space with them, and to work with them in this capacity.
Wow. What are the political? I mean, is it the same set of political forces in Canada? I mean, in this show, this shows a cultural naivete, and a lack of character on my behalf, because so many of us in the United States have this image of Canada being this sort of gentle nation that just seems so damn polite, and I'm trying to inject a note of humor into a dark situation, obviously, but I never would have thought in Canada you'd be facing the same prejudices. How did it get there? I mean, in a state like in a nation like Canada, where it seems like there is some level of attention paid to social justice.
Well, that's a fine question. People have an idea of Canada as being this, safe haven of some kind. They boast universal health care. Since Trump's election, a lot of people have, threatened to move to Canada. For Indigenous peoples, much of what is going on in the United States is also happening in Canada. The incidences of like obesity and diabetes, and as I said, with respect to this Gempeg Dam, that affects all the territories south of those hydroelectric storehouses. Mm-hmm. And what it's done is it's affected their way of life. Somebody once said that a nation is sovereign only in so much as it can feed its own people. And, we continue to, not consult our indigenous communities with respect to infrastructure, fossil fuel infrastructures and other developments. And it's, what it's done is it's essentially stolen, the resources that, our indigenous communities have owned for literally thousands of years. There are ancient petroglyphs on some of the rocks up here in Cross Lake, which prove the existence of our people. And, we have what was known as the Northern Flood Agreement when that hydroelectric dam was put in place. And what they did was they held up a pencil and they said, should the water levels either exceed or drop the height of a pencil, there would be some type of compensation. And they also promised to eradicate poverty. But, these promises, just like, the broken treaties, such as the Treaty of Fort Laramie, they're not upholding those things. And, our indigenous people are suffering. The near genocidal extinction, which began 526 years ago, really is continuing today in other ways. They no longer hand out smallpox blankets to kill us off. They literally feed us to death. They take away our traditional hunting grounds, fishing grounds. These were all very sacred to our people. And, that's why I always say that to honor and respect the land is to honor and respect the people that grew from this land.
Wow. Yeah. It's pretty hard to put me in a position where I don't have much to say, but to understand that there's this pathological pursuit from not from news reports, but people like you on the ground to essentially not just marginalize and even begin to say what's happening here. We're talking about. Is genocide too strong a word? If you're going to all these these different indigenous groups of people, and not through a sudden act of violence, but really the behavior and economic warfare you're practicing on a group of people, essentially not overtly seek to, but effectively work to wipe them out. I mean, is it that bad?
Well, some people have complained at the use of the word genocidal, near genocidal extinction, those words. The truth is that it wasn't that long ago that the governments were practicing sterilization on our women. They were looking to displace and assimilate us by way of residential schools. Mm-hmm. Many of our indigenous youth died. They lost their lives under the care of priests and nuns, they made our youth cut their hair. They made it illegal to speak the language, to use any of our medicines to smudge. We use sage, as a means for cleansing and to help us walk in a good way. All these things were punishable by way of corporal punishment. Our youth were killed. I mean, literally outright killed and put into mass graves. So, we talk about the Holocaust and the concentration camps, and what a lot of people don't know is those concentration camps were modeled by reservations right in the United States and Canada. So we need to correct the record. This is why it's so important to teach our youth to tell their own stories through indigenous eyes. It's time for our young people, our indigenous people, to rise up and control their own narratives, in a good way. We need all hands on deck, both allied and indigenous, and we do have a lot of allies out there, and people are waking up. So I see it happening in Rhode Island. I see it happening in North and South Dakota, Washington State. I see it happening in D.C., in Winnipeg, and Cross Lake, and in cities and towns all across this country in the world.
Wow. Do you are you planning to get back here to the States soon? Have you? I know you've been keeping a watchful eye on what's happening here in Burrillville and in across the state. Do you have any plans with respect to Little Rhodey?
Well, you know, I'm not exactly. I'm not sure where my path is going to take me. You know, I encourage my family over there in Rhode Island. You know, because you know, again, we do have these politicians that champion themselves as environmentalists that do take, you know, they pack their coffers with fossil fuel money. You know, I'm impressed with Matt Brown, you know, who has promised to step up to the plate for our most heavily impacted communities over there in the Port of Providence and Burrillville. What people don't realize about Rhode Island is that Rhode Island has the oldest gas infrastructure in the country, and it dates back to the Civil War. And that gas infrastructure leaks like a sieve. And National Grid knew what they were getting when they took on, you know, when they took on that role, and they bought it off from Narragansett Electric, I guess it was. And you know, so what people don't realize is that methane, you know, is you know, up to 86 times the greenhouse effect is carbon dioxide, CO2, and you know, it really has a more devastating effect on the climate. You know, and the other thing to remember is that, you know, while there's no fossil fuel extraction occurring in Rhode Island, all of that comes down from the Marcellus Shale over in Pennsylvania. For every dirty front gas power plant that exists, there are literally thousands of fracking wells. And what they do when they frack is they dig down vertically into Mother Earth, horizontally into the shale. They set off explosions which cause fissures, and they pump it with over 700 proprietary chemicals along with sand. The sand holds those fissures open, which allows the gas to escape. Along with that gas escaping is released naturally occurring uranium and those 700 proprietary chemicals which reach into our watersheds and our aquifers. So, you know, we have Univar right over there in the Port of Providence. They boast a full suite of chemicals for the fossil fuel industry. So we really have to pay attention to what's going on over there in the Port of Providence. You know, I would say that right now, that along with the Burrillville frac gas power plant is the two things that Rhode Islanders really need to be vigilant about, and you know, hold their politicians to the fire, their feet to the fire. So I think they're doing a wonderful job. I appreciate the efforts of Monica Bantas, who's helping to lead the opposition against that proposed liquefaction facility, and of course all my family over there in Pascog in Burrillville that are opposing that power plant. So people need to come together in a good way, you know, consolidate their efforts and be there for one another, you know, because it affects all of us.
Okay. Well, it's great to catch up with you. You know, as you've been talking, one of the things I've been thinking about is perhaps some way using the show as a vehicle to bring young people together that you're working with up there in Canada and the Indigenous communities. If there's a way to use technology to bring them together with the young people who are fighting a similar battle, perhaps in ironically somewhat more comfortable climes, but perhaps bringing those youth together in one show in one couple of hours to amplify each other's message might be interesting and I think provocative. And you know, I'll get in touch with you post show and let's see if there's a way we can make that work that makes sense and it can be interesting, great for the kids and also, like I said, to ramp up the pressure, educate people, and bring the message home both to Rhode Island and northwestern Canada at the same time.
Well, I want to quickly thank you, Pat, you know, for being a megaphone for you know, the important issues out there that maybe are resonating to mainstream media. Right now I have to go because the youth are bugging me because I have to take them to an event right now. But
all right.
As always, it's an honor to share space with you. Many blessings. Many Wachoni, we say, water is life. And yeah, I look forward to making that connection in the near future.
All right, buddy. All right. John Gonzalez, okay. What's your new title? I don't want to mess this up. I finally get it. It's no longer Standing Bear.
The new title is Standing White Eagle Featherman, and also I just published a book called Standing Rock is Everywhere, A Story of Faith, Courage, and Compassion. You can find that on Lulu, Amazon, and it will also soon be on Barnes & Noble and all the other major venues.
Great. We'll put a link out there here locally. God bless, buddy. Thank you so much.
All right, thanks, Pat. Bye-bye.
All right, we're going to take one more quick break. Waiting in the wings in our next segment, we're going to have Spencer Dickinson call in. Of course, he running for the governorship of the great state of Rhode Island. Folks, we are the Coalition, loud and proud, outrage porn-free, civilly disobedient media, broadcasting on the World Wide Web. Facebook.com/Coalition Radio, on the mighty Twitter at Coalition_ and the mothership coalitionradio.us. If you listen to this now or in the future, you'd honor us if you would follow us or like us or do whatever you're supposed to do on any one of those social media platforms. Rely upon you, the listener, and our sponsors like Air Sciences, Darrell Gold's group fighting mold remediation and biohazards in the home, school, and industrial workplace. We rely upon all of you to help amplify a message demanding change, demanding integrity in government, and empowering people to take control over their own lives. Folks, stay tuned. We'll be right back. And we're back. Getting right back into it. Joining us live on the line, as mentioned, Spencer Dickinson, former member of the...
Hello, Pat.
How are you, buddy? Running running for the nomination for the Democratic nomination in this week's primary. Spencer, how is the campaign trail going?
I feel really good. You know, it's a little different. We're not spending the kind of money that other people are spending, but that's not, you know, that doesn't bother me. I'm feeling great. And by the way, I've got to remind your listeners something that you said when I was on your show a month or so ago, and I really liked it. I think every talk show host should be, you know, maybe asked to sign it. And you said, we don't care what your polling data is. We don't care what your campaign fund is. We just want to know what kind of a governor you would make. And I thought, wow, words to live by. Pat Ford knows what he's doing.
No, I appreciate that, buddy. You know, it's our mantra. It's how we get independent voices heard. It's how we get independent ideas, new ideas reflected into the political debate. You know, it's clear that if left to their own devices, the two frontrunners in this election would simply like us all to go home, go about our business. No story here. No story. No story.
No story. Yeah.
No story. And just accept what they are going to spoon feed us. And your effort's been remarkable because you refuse to do that. You will not go gently into that good night. You are fighting a great fight. And it's great to see you getting the media coverage you deserve now. And just, you know, this is what's equally refreshing, and this is the last time I'll mention the two frontrunners, is, what's the word, a program? Was that the right word that we use in English? A program that the body politic, the people, not, you and I are inside the bubble, all right? This is part of our everyday lives. The distaste for which individual folks out there in the real world, who are smart, talented, hardworking, perhaps not as laser focused like you and I are on the political process, mainly because they're concerned with all the complexities of living life in the 21st century here in the Northeast. All right, this distaste, and actually I'll use the word disgust they're showing for the two frontrunners' refusal to engage and the type of back and forth that is part of the tradition here, the great political tradition here in Rhode Island, is equally as refreshing because, quite frankly, that disgust, I believe, is going to be reflected in the voting booth this week. And I think a lot of people are going to be very upset, and there's going to be a lot of shocks and a lot of surprises. And I believe the political landscape will be completely different come Thursday.
You know, you could be right about that. It's very hard to gauge that, though. I don't have polls. I have had them in the past, and they've been very accurate, but I don't have it now at all. I have no idea.
So I just want to give you, let's focus on you. I want to give you the chance now, because we'll get this out into Facebook tonight. We're going to have a quicker delivery system now. We'll get this out into Facebook tonight and highlight when you were on, and we're going to essentially reshare the broadcast from Facebook Live. But we're going to break out so people can skip forward directly to parts that they're interested in. I want to give you the time you need now to really deliver a message to Rhode Islanders who are listening or will listen this weekend in the run-up to the actual election. What's the message you want to say to the average, everyday Rhode Islander?
Well, that's okay. This is good, and I appreciate the time. The message has many parts. You know, I guess it starts. I've got to say something about my opposition, my competitors. The governor is, you know, she's preoccupied with other things. She's got two problems. Number one, she never did an apprenticeship in the things that you have to know about in order to run a state. You know, I was a systems analyst at one time, and, you know, if I look at it, I at least know what it is, and I'm interested in it. I know what a flowchart looks like, and I know what people working and succeeding look like, and I know what the guideposts are when they're not. And I don't think she brings any of that. And then add to that the fact that I don't think she cares. And that's a big problem, because you've got to care a little bit. If you don't care, you're going to get results like poor customer service in the Department of Motor Vehicles, which is a fixable problem. You know, you probably could fix it quicker than I could, but, you know, the answer is pretty simple. You got to have a unified database, and you got to have every station performing all transactions, and you got to have everybody trade. How hard is that? You know, it sounds, maybe I'm oversimplifying, but you got to care, and you got to make the effort, but it's doable. And then you got the third problem with the governor. I said there were two, but, you know, add the third. She's preoccupied with collecting money. And I have talked to business people who basically feel that they've been extorted. And I would love her to sue me on that, because if she does, some judge is going to give me discovery, and my attorneys, which today I can afford, a few years ago I couldn't, we'll do depositions and we'll prove it. But I think the big problem there, and I should jump to that a little later in terms of economic development, but my other opponent I'm having a little problem with also. should point out, I did a debate. I don't know if you're familiar with John Carlovali's State of the State program. I'm guessing that he's interviewed you, or Richard August has interviewed you in the past.
No, actually, I think the order of protections that have been granted to a variety of state officials probably keep me out of that portion.
The minute he hears about it, he will, because they have interviewed everybody, including Matt Brown. So they decided to do a debate. You know, they did the same debate at State of the State program. It's a TV public access program, which they've done for years, and I think it's very well done. But anyhow, so I got a call, and I said, sure, I'll do it. Well, then it turned out that Gina Raimondo wasn't going to do it. No big surprise. But unfortunately, when I showed up for the show, Matt Brown wasn't there either. He hadn't answered, and effectively it was a double empty chair debate.
Huh.
So, you know, so I'm not convinced when Matt Brown says that he's criticizing Gina for not showing up. You know, when it suits him, he doesn't show up either. And, you know, you are shortchanging the public. I think the people have a right to have access to their candidates, and I think they have a right to hear their candidates talking to each other. And another problem, and I have to say this, we're getting toward the end, and I wish that the journalists would do this, but I do have problems with Matt Brown, and Gina is bringing them out. If you've ever voted in a Democratic primary, you are getting big postcards. But some of the stuff that she's saying is true. You know, in 2006, when he left the race against Sheldon Whitehouse, and he was ahead, and somehow pulled out, there was a serious problem, and you know, we weren't looking into it, the legalities of it at the time. But what I know is, or what I think I know, and if there's anybody out there that wants to check it, please, you know, let's do it and find out. But what I think I know is that somebody concocted or engineered a very elaborate system for bypassing federal election laws, because you're only allowed to contribute so much. And somebody called some East Coast contributors, asked them to contribute to Hawaii, Democratic State Committee, and also Massachusetts and also Maine, and then in effect asked them to take the money, ask the committees to take the money, and then send it back to, of all people, Matt Brown. So did he do that, and is it a crime? I mean, people are debating that, but I'm a little disappointed when his staff, you know, vehemently disagrees with Gina Raimondo, and they say, well, nothing really happened, and we're off the hook. Well, I'm not so sure that's true. There was some kind of a settlement, but Preet Bharara got an actual conviction on Dinesh D'Souza for a felony, and another attorney, Kazami, Robert Kazami, got a plea for a Trump's attorney whose name was Michael Cohen. I think that was the name. And essentially, to me, the specifics of those two cases are very close to what Matt Brown did. So I'm being asked, in effect, to maybe step aside for Matt Brown. Very hard for me to do. In my many years in politics, I've never found that building something good on a weak foundation had a good outcome. You know, you're often asked to do that. You know, overlook this little rule or overlook this basic principle, and we'll get something good out of it. You know, something good, whatever the good thing is, some kind of reform. But you know, that's not really, that doesn't work. I mean, you have to build it from the bottom up, and it always has to be good. You know, it has to be right. So for me, Matt Brown as a candidate with this very serious, flawed past, that's a problem. And you know, I'd be a little happier if he said, okay, I was younger then, I made a mistake, it was illegal, or maybe I made a deal with the incumbent, who knows. But at least tell the truth rather than just say it never happened. So I'm having a little problem with that. I also have a little problem with the fact that sometimes when I say something, I find that he has written it down, like say on affordable housing, which I know something about, having, you know, been in that business in Rhode Island for 40 years and being a contractor and builder. I know a little bit about that, and I feel as though he listens to me and then he says it just a little bit better. And I have to admit, I'm a little bit jealous of that. So he's got the ability to express the problem extremely well. He's good. He's got charisma. He's a shiny object. And if you're not, you know, if you're not the shiny object, which I am not, then you get a little bit jealous when that happens. And you know, I was on the show with Gene Valicenti the other night. I brought this up, and he had actually originally said, he said, what this state needs is a mechanic. You know, this state needs to be fixed. It needs a mechanic. It doesn't need a policy wonk or somebody who has great ideas. And I was thinking about that. more, a little bit about that, and a little bit more, but no. And the guy says, no, your car won't run. And he goes back inside. And then you go in, you find out he doesn't have any idea how to fix the car. And worse than that, he doesn't even have a toolbox. And, you know, that's the Matt Brown I'm looking at in the debates, and I'm a little frustrated. And my thinking is that, you know, when you're in politics and you do what I've done, you prepare yourself for some, you know, some future thing that you're going to do. And I'm not sure that when I, you know, joined the Army when I was 19, or when I worked at Prudential as a systems analyst, or same job at Citizens Bank in Providence, I wasn't thinking, gee, these are skills which are going to help me if I ever run for governor. But they do. And, you know, also owning your own business, you learn a little bit about reality. And if you have libertarian listeners out there, which I'm sure you do, probably cornered the market on them. I may not be a libertarian, but I understand what a market is.
Yeah.
And I understand, you know, what it is to make a profit and run a business. And I understand from 12 years in the legislature, and also being on the finance committee, preparing the state budget, that, you know, you have to know something about this stuff, and you can't just fake it. And, you know, it also helps to have been around for some of the recent problems. You know, one of the things that we remember the most right now is 38 Studios, with good reason. We never had a resolution on 38 Studios. And I remember, I think it was April 11th of 2014, my picture was on the front page of the Providence Journal, and along with a couple of my colleagues on the new Oversight Committee. We had a new speaker. Gordon Fox had gone, and we had a new speaker, and we were the new leadership of the Oversight Committee. I was vice chair, and we were going to begin an investigation of 38 Studios that day.
Right.
You know, as I look at myself in that picture, I thought I had a promise. And I thought that, you know, in politics, a promise is a promise.
Right.
Well, I didn't have a promise, or if I did, the rug, in effect, was pulled up from under us. And I still remember that, and, you know, part of my goal in running for governor is that there's some unfinished business, and I will do an investigation of 38 Studios, and you're not going to have state police losing their morale by being told that they're going to do their interviews on the phone. I don't know if anybody in your audience understands police work or interrogation or anything like that, but you don't do interviews on the telephone. You got to be looking at the person you're interviewing. Right. And the state police did interviews on the telephone for their 38 Studios investigation, and they were prevented from interviewing the people of interest, the greatest persons of interest, you know, the speaker and this attorney. Crazy. And I don't know how that happened. I think I hold the current governor responsible, but I think that one of the things I'd like to do is to go back and deal with that. I have an idea of what happened. It's not what you read in the paper. I can't really talk about it because, you know, I'll do an investigation about it, and we will find out. But you can't just say, well, it's probably somebody in this category of people, and they probably did this, and this is one particular name I'm suspicious of.
Right.
But, you know, that's not fair. I could be wrong. But I will tell you that I believe it's important, and I don't want to, you know, get too fixated on the Paw Sox. People complain that I worry too much about that. But I think one of the reasons the Paw Sox never had a prayer was that the voters, and particularly in certain representative districts, had enough. You know, they said, well, we didn't get satisfaction. We've been betrayed. We don't trust our government, and since that's true, you know, there's one little thing here where we can exercise some control, and we're basically going to say we're just not going along with the Paw Sox deal. And I think it's kind of sad because, you know, there was something good about the Paw Sox. We had an exchange student one year, and we were taking her to the airport, and we said, you know, what did you like most about your trip to America? What do you remember? And she said, Paw Sox game. You know, wow. And, you know, and so, and then there's, you know, there's the problem with urban renewal in Pawtucket. They need it badly. And this could be part of it. It could pay for it. But the thing is that you just don't, first of all, as governor, you don't ignore it and hope it'll happen. I think a leader has to sit down with somebody representing the team, maybe Larry Lucchino, and say, what do you need? You know, do you have to spend that much on the stadium? Could it be a little smaller? Could you add the family room later? In other words, it's not totally unlike, you know, sitting down with somebody for plans for their house. And who's going to own this real estate? And is this going to be a development around the stadium? And, you know, would you be making money off of that? Find out the whole story. Find And of course, that's a meeting between a couple of people. But when you get it settled, all the cards on the table, everything out in the open, and then if there's a bond issue, you know, it's as low as it possibly could be. I know that you probably, and I should let you say this, Pat, but you may not be in favor of public support for baseball teams.
I'm not pretty much in favor of public support for anything.
Okay, I understand that. But I think that when if we did arrive at an agreement, we do have the Rhode Island Constitution. And again, for your listeners at home, look it up. It's Article 6, Section 16. You cannot borrow money, which means write a bond issue in the state of Rhode Island for more than $50,000 unless the voters vote on it. And that's what they set up, interestingly enough, for the Paw Sox. They set up a special thing where they weren't going to be voting for it, where the voters weren't involved. And it's the same thing that happened at 38 Studios.
Oh,
you can invent a product like an apple pie bond or something, or, as it turns out, in this case, the moral obligation bond. There's nothing legal about those bonds. And
let me just interject for a second. It also says in the Constitution, and this is kind of a little hint I'm just going to throw out there, that thou shalt not, if you will, I'll give it a biblical intonation, thou shalt not go into new forms of gambling without voter consent. And that's something somebody's going to be reminded of.
Are you looking at Article 6, Section 16?
I don't have the Constitution in front of me, but I will tell you that my reading of it is that you don't get to put in new forms of gaming, and sports betting is a new form of gaming without a vote of the people. And that vote, to my knowledge, is not scheduled, and to my knowledge, that facility is going to be built. And
you know, you're making a very good point. I don't see that as being the same as the 38 Studios bond issue, and I don't think you do either. But it's a parallel situation, and what's similar about it is we're ignoring the Constitution.
The difference between the two is that, one, I get to wait till the facility's built, and then when it opens, then I am an aggrieved party. I am injured because the practice takes place, and then I get to sue to get it shut down.
You know, Pat, we should talk about this because I actually planned to sue the state over the question of the 38 Studios bonds. I could not find a lawyer who was willing to do that, and I was willing to pay. I was very disappointed.
Well,
and they said essentially that a judge will not allow you to have standing on that as an individual. A citizen can't enforce the Constitution. So I hope you are successful, but I don't know how.
Oh, it may not be me. I just heard a little birdie, all right? A little birdie that, let's just say if you happen to have gotten to know in the last few months any self-absorbed political types who, chase windmills. I don't know if you know anybody like that you've met recently. All right. I loathe the fact that this state is going to place yet another monopoly on a segment of the entertainment industry and continue to wage this jihad against private industry by creating state-sponsored competition for the entertainment dollar. I loathe that. I hate that. If you're going to have sports gaming, if you're going to have casino gaming, and I'm not endorsing that behavior, but that ability to conduct that should be available to all businesses, not just
a monopoly. So maybe I should be able to run a little casino myself on Main Street.
There are plenty of states in this nation where local restaurants and local bars, and I'll use the example of Keno. If you're a local bar in this state right now, you get to run games of chance. So there is absolutely no reason why a monopoly is granted. Effectively, when the Twin River Corporation assumed control of Twin River in Lincoln, there was at least 2 companies engaged in for-profit casino gaming. That was bad enough. Now we have 1. And the state is the exclusive benefactor of that outside of the pittance thrown to that company, which is very profitable.
I happen to know if there's any particularly well-known person who is a lobbyist for that organization. Just asking. I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah. Well,
on the other hand, I could guess about half a dozen names and maybe get it right.
It's just disturbing because the biggest trend of all, as I mentioned, is the state's desire through lack of a better term, central planning, to essentially grant exclusive monopolies to individual companies, to large chunks of the Rhode Island economy. And I have a problem with that. I'm not a big, first of all, casino gaming is terrible economic development for 100 reasons, just like baseball stadiums are terrible economic development for 100 reasons. But I am no longer willing, and I used to obsess over all of those issues, and I would debate them tooth and nail, and usually successfully. I've embarrassed a couple people, including a late...
I can't win in a debate against a libertarian. That doesn't mean I am one.
So anyway, I just want to point that out to you as candidate Dickinson. We are about to. This governor has put up phony numbers as part of the budget for sports gaming, which there is no constitutional guarantee this state can even engage in. And even if their expert lawyers believe they should, for the good of the system, if you will, the process, they should at least engage in the referendum that I believe the state's constitution calls for.
Well, when in doubt, do it. Be on the safe side.
Why not?
Unless, of course, you're afraid you think you know how it's going to go, and you don't want to take that chance. And there's a lot of that. I think that's one of our problems. I think our government, our legislature, essentially makes up their mind what they want to do, and often they really don't care. And they get away with it.
Well, and by the way, the genesis, and I've told this story a couple times recently, so forgive me if I'm telling it to you again. The genesis of the term, because I was in the room when the term came up, the genesis of the term 38 Stadium had less to do with the financial mechanics underlying the financing of Stadium version 1 in Providence and 2 in Pawtucket, and more to do with the willful ignorance, the cultural arrogance of our state leaders willing to pell-mell, to hell with what we think, engage in behavior that clearly a significant majority of the state was opposed to. And I think looking at the performance of state government generationally in the state, the notion that somehow they knew better than us, I'm keeping it clean here tonight because you're on the air, but I think attorneys would say that belief is specious in nature.
Well, the use of the term for both projects, both enterprises, they did have something in common, and that's exactly right. Mm-hmm. And something that I've said, and you might be interested in it, I don't know, but we still owe money on the 38 Studios cover-up. We're still paying, and I think it's about $10-12 million a year. And I am looking forward, as governor, mm-hmm. to come out with a budget that doesn't include that money.
That would be outstanding.
We'll save $10 or $12 million, and if somebody on Wall Street wants to punish us, which they won't,
right? Because
they need our bonds so much more than we do. But
bingo.
I think it'll be interesting.
Bingo. It's like that a commercial on TV for the mortgage company, the mortgage website, when the couple is sitting in their little kitchenette and their breakfast nook, and the banksters are all lined up outside. That's exactly the reality of it. They do need us as much or more than we need them. There are always people.
That's why bond salespersons from New York come to Rhode Island and take administrators out to lunch.
Right. Right.
At expensive restaurants.
Right. The Libertarian Party has asked and has presented, and when we get representatives elected, we will legislate the notion that not only, this is kind of a stupid joke, but which two groups of people get to forget what they did the day before the next day? Weathermen and bond referendums. All right, we don't know what the weatherman said 2 days ago, and we don't remember. Ask anybody. I'm politically involved. I'd be challenged to tell you which bond referendums we passed 2 years ago. Not even remotely what's actually happened to the money, and how it was spent, and what the results have been. We need to demand that type of information before we are asked to vote on the next round of bond things. And we also need to continue to put out, as part of the bond proposal, the exact costs of placing the bond proposal with the legal fees.
That is something that ought to be out there. Do we have enough time to get into my very short analysis of truck tolling based on what
we got about 4 minutes, so go for it, buddy.
Oh, okay. Well, the issue of truck tolling about
Agreed.
selling bonds.
Yep.
But look at the numbers, and I'm using round numbers here. The gantries, which are the cameras over the roads, they're going to snap a picture of your vehicle, your truck, and pretty soon it'll be cars as well as trucks. But the first year we're going to collect about $60 million. 20 million of that, a third, is going to the people who are running that program, the out-of-state company that owns the cameras that are snapping a picture of your truck license plate.
Mm-hmm.
So that brings it down to 40 million. The 40 million essentially is going to finance some bonds. It's like a home mortgage, so it's going to be more than half of that money is going to be interest on the bonds. So let's pick a number and say it's 22 million. So by now we've got 60 million we're taking in. We've got 20 million going to the people that are collecting the money from the truckers. Another $22 million going to Wall Street to pay interest on the bonds. That leaves 18 million actual dollars to go into fixing highways. Now, if some of your listeners happen to be members of the construction trades who've been told this is for them, I'm asking you to think about that. And I think we could do this without, first of all, we don't need the gantries. Secondly, we don't need bonds. If we have $60 million, let's spend $60 million on roads. If we got to wait a couple of years during good times until we catch up with some other debt that we've got, let's spend the $60 million a year instead of $18 million a year. And if you guys in construction trades are thinking about this, we will have much more money to pay you for that wonderful work that you do, that we need.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. So in our closing minute,
maybe I am sort of like almost, but not quite a libertarian.
we'll get you there. We'll get you there. Okay. You
made. I am a Democrat, by the way. I have to say, I am a Democrat. Always have been.
There you go. So give folks, if you will, the links to how they can find out more about you on the web. I have a feeling a whole lot of people are going to be doing let's just say, if you're a Rhode Islander, there's a little bit of, there's a feel to this election that it's almost like final exams. And I think there's going to be a significant part of the state sitting down quietly at some point this weekend and giving themselves sort of a crash course in Spencer Dickinson, a crash course in the other two people. Where can people get a crash course
well, very
on
simple,
Spencer Dickinson?
SpencerDickinson.com, and I have a web page, and I actually have a phone number, and I get a few calls. I don't mind.
Actually, throw it out there.
No, well, it's on the web page.
It's on the web page. Okay, so you'll tease them to go to the web page. That's cool. So, all right, so folks, again, this is where we just have as the late great Vincent A. Buddy Cianci would say, this is where we come cocoa. If in fact you're unhappy with the direction that this state has taken, and I can't imagine, unless you're part of a privileged few, that you can be happy about the schools, that you can be happy about some of the incidents that have taken place this week, that you can be happy about our infrastructure, and that you can be happy about the direction the business climate has taken. You can be happy about the continued burying the head in the sand on 38 Studio. You can be happy about the process of how 38 Stadium did or didn't take place. If that makes me a negative person, well, that means if you're accusing me of being negative because I'm facing reality, then that person that makes that accusation is a fool.
You are not negative. You are a realist, and it needs to be said. And it needs to be said continuously and more so.
So take the time, go up on a Spencer site, SpencerDickinson.com, throw off the trappings. In fact, put blinders on. Back in the day in The Odd Couple, Spencer and I are old enough to remember this. When The Odd Couple TV show was on, every time Felix didn't want to hear something, he'd ring his hands in his ears and make loud noises. I won't do them live on the air. Do that when you hear people talking about the polling, the this, the that, as the adults in Charlie Brown would say, want, 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 want. Let's do the three-way blind Coca-Cola taste test. That's what you need to do. You need to, in a sense, look at the three websites, look at your shared experience in Rhode Island, and forget who said what, put a cover on it, and then, after reading and doing your own self-education, addressing the issues that matter to you most, then make a decision on who you are going to vote for, regardless of polling, fundraising. As we always say in the coalition, we don't care if you're going to win. We want to know why you should. And so pick your candidate exclusively on what you consider important, whether it be critical issues, whether it be experience, whether it be track record, whether it be integrity, whatever that is that's important to you, take the time, make the investment, because we can't afford, and this is the only thing I'll say about any of the individual candidates, we cannot, as a state, as a society, as a people, as a culture, as a way of life, we cannot afford another 4 years of Gina Raimondo. We simply can't.
I agree with that. Thank you very much, Pat. This is a great opportunity, a great thing you're doing for the, as a public service, this show. I really appreciate your including me on it.
All right, buddy. Listen, God bless. Good luck. I think we'll probably end up talking before then, but thank you. I'll leave you with a final thought here. At the Coalition, we consider the act of running for office second only to engaging in the defense of this nation and the armed services. We believe that the act of running for public office is the second highest act of patriotism that you can make as an American, given the...
Well, I can tell you from personal experience, there's a lot less crawling around in the mud, but you are correct.
All right. So, listen, God bless, buddy. Best of luck to you this week, and listen, enjoy it and give them hell. All right, bud?
That's how I look at it. Thank you, Pat.
All right, God bless. Spencer Dickinson running for the nomination for the governorship, the Democratic nomination for the governorship of the great state of Rhode Island. Folks, that's going to be it for tonight. Our long-suffering producer, Joe, I think is ready to pass out behind the screen here. Hell, he's had to stare at me for 3 hours. We are the Coalition. We are, as always, infinitely loud, infinitely proud, civilly disobedient media, broadcasting live on the Worldwide Coalition Network here at the GoLocal Live Broadcast Center, 90 Way Boston Street, in the heart of the city we so love, Providence, Rhode Island. The Naked City, the city of 1,000 stories. We told you 3 of them tonight about Rhode Islanders who not only take it personally, but clearly give a damn and work tirelessly to improve the quality of your life, even though you may never meet them. So for John, for Peter, and for Spencer, and all the folks who've joined us in the last few months, I say thank you. I thank you for listening, whether it be tonight live or throughout the week. Next week, we're going to be focusing on the aftermath of the election, as well as some of the financial issues facing the state. Folks, have a wonderful weekend. Vote. Please vote. We'll see you soon.